So in this video I want to talk about experimental probability, also known as relative frequency. And two questions to kind of introduce it. The first question is, what is the probability that the next time I roll a fair die it will land on 5? And we can address that. We actually know a lot about rolling a die. You know, I want to find the probability that I roll a fair die and I get 5. Remember, we've defined probability as the number of ways an event may occur divided by the total number of possible outcomes. And we know that the total number of possible outcomes on one roll of a fair die is 6. We also know the number of ways the event 5 may occur is 1. There's only one way to roll a 5 on one roll of a die. Okay, and that's 5. If it was 2 rolls of a die, there would be a few different ways I could do that. 4 and 1. 3 and 2, 2 and 3, 1 and 4. 4 different ways to roll a 5 on 2 rolls of a die. But on one roll of a die, there's only one way. So there's a 1 in 6 chance. We understand the underlying process. We know all the numbers involved. It's fairly straightforward. But if I'm asked, to find the probability that the next car that passes the school gate will be black, this will be slightly more complicated. I want to find the probability that the next car that passes the school gate will be black. What do we know? Do we know the total number of possible outcomes? Do we know the total number of ways the event black may occur? And the answer is no, we don't really. So we're going to have to, do something else. We're going to have to do a little bit of research here. And what we'll do generally with something like this is we'll conduct a survey. So a survey involves essentially counting all the different car colours. And there's different ways you could do that. Ring around car dealerships, ask them about the different coloured cars they sell. Or, phone houses, ask them about the colour of the car that they own. Or go onto a busy motorway and count all the cars, count all the different colours. But come up with some data to look at. Essentially, we're involved in something like this. We would have to collect data because the underlying process is slightly more complicated than just looking at rolling a die. So we would collect data, and we do that through a survey of some description. Okay, and we would take a sample of the whole population. We're not going to look at every single car in the country. That would be the most accurate way to do it, but it would take too much time, and in order to reduce that time, it would cost too much money. So that's why we sample. Save time, save money. So instead of looking at every single car, we take a sample. So suppose I go along and I take a sample of cars and I collect my results and I put them into this table. So I've got my colour of car and the frequency. So in my sample, 24 of the cars were white, 32 were red, 14 were black cars, 16 blue cars, 10 green cars, and 4 of different colours. And down here I have this symbol. This is the Greek letter capital sigma, and that generally means the sum of everything. So essentially we're looking at totaling everything up. This is the total. So if I add up all my numbers, 24 and 32, that's 56, and 1470, and 1686, another 10 to 96, and then 4 to 100, a nice round number there. So I've got 100. I've taken a sample of 100 cars. And what I do is I can look at the relative frequency. And the relative frequency is just, the frequency. So the relative frequency, let me write it down here, is just the frequency divided by the sum of all the frequencies. So the first one will be 24 over 100. 24%. Or 0.24. I can write them in as fractions, I can write them in as decimals or percentages, fairly straightforward. The easiest way I'm getting here is just to write it in maybe as a decimal. But as you know, probabilities can be written as fractions or percentages or decimals. Relative frequency is just another kind of form of probability. In fact, it's experimental probability. We'd have 0.32, 0.14, 0.16, 0.10, and 0.04. So what is the probability that the next car that passes the school gate will be black? Well, the probability that the next car that passes the school gate will be black, on our evidence, we are saying that's, about 0.14. Now, we don't know that that's definitely correct, but it's our evidence based on the data we've collected. We've conducted an experiment which was counting cars, and we've kind of established a probability based on that. So the probability of black is 0.14. Note the important thing to know about relative frequency tables: if I add up all these numbers, I should get 1. If I don't get 1, I have made a mistake in there. Well, sometimes if you introduce rounding in here, which I haven't done, but if you introduce rounding, you may find you don't get quite 1. Okay, relative frequency tables really, useful for finding experimental probabilities. Something else relative frequency tables are useful for doing is constructing pie charts. So constructing pie charts. Remember, pie chart is just a circle that's broken up into individual sectors, and each sector will have a central angle. So if I wanted to draw a pie chart here, I just put in an extra column here calling it central angle. I want to find the central angle. To find the central angle, I just write CA. It's just the relative frequency multiplied by the total degrees in a circle, which is 360. So I can use relative frequency tables to help me draw a pie chart. So type some of these things in. 0.24 times 360. Well, that would be 86.4. So if I was constructing a pie chart, the sector white would have a central angle of 86.4 degrees. 0.32 times 360. Well, that's 115.2 degrees. 0.14 times 360. Well, that's 50.4 degrees. 0.16 times 360. That's 57.6 degrees. 0.1 times 360, well, that's one I can do in my head. That's going to be 36 degrees. And 0.04 times 360, that's going to be 14.4 degrees. Okay? And again, if I look at the total sum of all the central angles, they should add up to 360 degrees. If they don't, I've made a mistake. And once you're armed with your central angles, then you can go and construct your pie chart from there. Okay? But ultimately, what am I talking about? I'm really just talking about surveying, collecting data. When we don't understand the underlying process, we collect data and use a relative frequency in order to be able to talk about probability. So the probability in this case of black, it's actually just the relative frequency for black. Okay? So when we don't understand the underlying process, we collect data, look at relative frequencies, and then we can talk about probabilities. Okay? In section 5.4 in your textbooks, practice.